Right, good evening everybody. If you did have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent please, thanks very much. A massive welcome to Janine Griffiths with The Media on Trial, Preventing Global Catastrophe One Word at a Time. Investigative journalist Janine turns her attention to our beloved media. A long-term tool gainfully employed in manipulating our opinions and us, causing fear and uncertainty, bringing useless time-consuming gossip and celebrity to an audience of millions who mostly accept what is put before them, without much question. The rest are distracted with huge amounts of information. And to balance the books, as it were, we have people like Janine who ask questions and do research. Yet again, there is evidence of occult goings-on as we are coaxed into certain acceptances. Janine aims tonight to increase our awareness of our propagandists and therefore allow us to hopefully break their spell. Janine's excellent website is all the W's, akashictimes.co.uk. Please welcome Janine Griffiths.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thanks to Rob for that wonderful introduction. So, for those who don't know me, let's see if I can operate this thing. I am Janine, and I am one of the founding editors of the Akashic Times. Basically, it's a news website which I set up because I was getting fed up of mainstream media propaganda. What I would say is we're at a critical time in our history. Never before have we been on the precipice of total global domination at the hands of a few. Now, when you say this to most people, they think you're talking about some wild conspiracy theory that has no basis in fact, because that's what many people are conditioned to believe. But the more I research this type of thing, the more I realise that mind control is very real, and it dominates many aspects of our lives. And I suppose the most dangerous thing about it, more dangerous than at any other time in the past, I would argue, is it's very covert, mainly. So this is where I go into the forms of mind control, and I'd say there are two main forms. There's the overt control, that's the newspapers and the TV programs that they put right there in front of you, and the things that they pretty much don't try to hide. You know, they try and say, okay, this is how it is, and you all just kind of have to accept it. But then you've got the covert control, you know, so there you're talking about things such as subliminal advertising. You're talking about what they're not telling you. So what I do with a lot of research that I do is I read between the lines. So covert can include things such as wordplay as well. I go into that a little bit in my talk when I start speaking about the occult aspects. Now, the occult is a word that people shy away from because they think it's all this airy-fairy, new agey stuff. But actually, the more you look into it, it's right there in front of us. So I'll go into a little bit about that later on. Today's corporate journalism is nothing more than a marketing exercise. Doesn't matter what paper you read. You've got the obvious ones like the Daily Mail, which doesn't try to hide their bias. And then you've got you know, other ones that a lot of people don't see in such an obvious light. I'm talking about papers like The Guardian, which people seem to think is the bastion of truth nowadays, and the BBC paedophile haven. A lot of people put their trust in that as well. So, and the way they divide people is very insidious as well, because that's what the mainstream media's main function is. If you divide people, they cannot come together as easily to find their own solutions and to find a way around some of this control that's going on. So they do this through race baiting. Mainly, so there's not a day goes by where you don't hear in the newspaper some zealous celebrity making an offensive remark, or you know, a story about a school or something where somebody got offended at what was done or what was said, I lose track now, and that's all very deliberate. It plays into the hands of us against them, and that's very useful when it comes to certain agendas. They do it through out-and-out lying, just basically making stuff up and distorting the facts. The reason why I've decided to include a little bit of discussion about the occult in this talk is it's something that people don't understand, you know, with the terminology that they use every day, the pictures and the symbolism behind what they see. And I decided to really do some research on that, because that has a lot more influence than most people think, and it's the one area where people kind of say, okay, that's just a silly conspiracy theory, it's airy-fairy stuff, but actually once you look into it and you see the kind of techniques and mechanisms behind it, that becomes very important as well. In this talk, I want to cover a little bit about the war on terrorism, the ISIS hoax, and even the name ISIS, it plays into sort of ancient Egyptian knowledge as well. ISIS was a goddess that was known by 1,000 different names in Egyptian mythology, and we can even see this with this so-called terrorist group. I say so-called because we really don't know where half of these groups come from. So it's known as ISIS, I lose track with all the various different names that they pull out there. The agenda behind the water bucket challenge, which has some links with what's going on with ISIS, which a lot of people don't realise. The police shootings and the drive, there's a real push at the moment to arm the police in this country. And that goes hand in hand with some of the other things that we see around us, the financial meltdown, because when that happens, and I am convinced that the financial situation of this country is very, very unstable, to say the least, and it's only going to get worse. This is why we see certain laws being pushed at the moment, the drive to get rid of human rights, the drive to target so-called non-violent terrorists, which David Cameron expands to include conspiracy theorists, or so-called conspiracy theorists. All of these different laws coming through at the moment to really stop people from speaking out. So this is where the media becomes important, and this is how I begin my talk today, because the media is what we say in journalism as the fourth estate. Some may ask, how is it that so many different journalists, media professionals from all different walks of life can collude in widespread propaganda and corruption? After all, the press are supposed to be the fourth estate, aren't they? So we're told. And thousands of journalists sign up each and every year with the intention to make positive changes in the media industry. But you see, what actually happens is, and I've experienced a little bit of this myself, they get into the industry and they find actually that's not how it works, because the media, like anything else, is a system. So you don't actually get to have as much influence or as much of a say as your first talk. See, what happens is most journalists start their careers working as the dog's body at the bottom. I know I did. So you'll fetch teas, you'll write 50-word stories about the local flower show or something, and you'll generally run errands. And when you finally do make it, not necessarily to the top rungs of the ladder, but to a bit of a more senior position, you get invited, you start getting invited, shall I say, to parties with prominent celebrities, politicians and other famous figures. But, these things come with conditions attached to them. They come with limitations. You can't ask, for example, what they call off-schedule questions. In other words, questions that haven't been emailed to the various PR teams. I remember attending an event, and it wasn't anybody particularly significant or well-known across the UK, in Telford, where I worked as a local newspaper journalist. And I'd, try to ask some of my own questions, and they weren't even that controversial. They weren't answered, and you're taken aside the next day in the editor's office and given a good bollocking. So you can't really do that. And what they say is, if you do ask off-schedule questions, if you do go against what has been set out for you, you'll most likely either lose your jobs, although the reality is the first 1 or 2 times, you'll be subject to disciplinary action, or you'll get like a really stiff telling off. And you won't get any more invitations to these top events, and your question won't get answered anyway. So what do most people do? They toe the line, and they just settle for the rather mediocre pleasure of going home and boasting that they met such and such a Z-list celebrity to their equally conditioned families. And you end up with a bit of a system, and this is one of the most important things to understand in the media, particularly when you're talking to people who simply aren't awake, or, as I say, some choose not to be awake. Because while all the other systems, you know, the political system, the military, control speech and action, the press controls the mind. You can't have any tyranny or dictatorship in this world without controlling the mind. I mean, even in places like North Korea, it's very, very difficult to get people to do as you would like them to do if you haven't conditioned them in a certain way. So this is where it becomes really, really important to have that freedom of information. So I go on about the mainstream press, and it's great that we've got an alternative press building up. But to be perfectly honest, one of the reasons why I started doing what I do is I wasn't necessarily taken by a lot of the so-called alternatives out there. Some of them are what I would call controlled opposition. But what I invite people to do is read everything, including the mainstream, including the alternatives, and come to your own conclusions. Because what you'll find those contradictions. You'll find things that, you know, really didn't seem to make sense before, and you'll start putting the pieces together. So on one hand, you know, like, let me just talk about the alternatives for a little bit. You've got nut jobs like Alex Jones screaming into the camera and helping to perpetuate that same divide and rule agenda, and also the stereotype of the, you know, tinfoil hat person who is completely irrational or can't remain calm or civilized or something like this. And the way it's done is you don't get complete disinformation. What you'll get is you'll get half-truths. So you'll get people like Alex Jones, and there are many others out there, that will put out some good information, and that information can help to wake people up. This is why I say read everything. However, you also have to be very critical. Even with some of the stuff that I do, one of the things I'm always telling people is research the facts for yourself. I can only put out so much. You take it, you do your own due diligence, and that's the approach that I would encourage people to take with everything. And then you've got an element of the alternatives, which they give out some information, they're genuine, but it concentrates too much on what the problems are, rather than what some of the solutions may be. You know, so I hear a lot of people in this truth movement, or the conscious community, or the activist community, whatever you call it, say, you know, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just the way things are, and it's just important to be aware of it, but get on with your own lives, what can you do? Well, if that were true, I wouldn't be standing here. It's one of the biggest lies ever told. If there is truly nothing that ordinary people can do, there wouldn't be so much time and effort invested in concealing the truth and covering things up. Because after all, if we're powerless to act anyway, then what really would be the point in knowing all of this stuff? Why is media manipulation and mind control such a big part of the agenda? You know, it's my belief that if the majority or even a sizable minority of the population were aware not just of what's going on, that's one thing, waking up is great, But the second part of that, I would say, is getting up. If you realised how society really worked and took steps to do something, whatever it is that you can do about it, I think we would be living in a very different society right now. And I don't necessarily think it takes a violent revolution to do so either. So, you know, imagine if a sizable chunk of the population simply set up their own schools, for example, because schools are another conditioning tool. Stopped going to work and kind of set up their own communities. There is some of that happening already, by the way. And demanded that the parasites were removed from power. People have lots of different terms for them. The elites, I hate that term because I don't see why they're elite. The global power structure, the governments, the corporations. When I use any of these terms, I'm referring to the whole lot. I don't really sort of distinguish too much between them anymore because they all have the same agenda. What if people took their money from the banks? Actually, that might be something that people need to look at very soon. Set their own laws and codes of conduct. Again, we have this already, especially when it comes to fighting against certain things. Like there's a lot of judgments being made against fracking now, against big corporations coming in and building supermarkets on land that was once, you know, full of independent shops and communities. So we're getting some more of this coming through. And later I go into why there's a renewed push, a renewed clampdown on free speech, and the intention to move the EU Human Rights Act, which is going on at the moment. Before I go into that, though, there's something that I always make clear. Your rights cannot be given to you. They cannot be granted to you by any government. And this is what people have been kind of taught to, you know, believe. Oh, okay, we receive these rights, so if they're written down on paper, that kind of codifies it for us. One thing that I know about freedom is it's something that you have to be constantly vigilant for. It's something that you have to constantly fight for until you remove the power from the wrong types of people, shall we say. So this is kind of where we're at the moment, you know, people saying things like, you know, take too much effort, you know, would lose the things that we hold dear and things like that. But history tells us a very different story. For example, I always say to people, what if Martin Luther King woke up in the 60s and said, hey, you know what, blacks are in the minority in America and there's nothing that we can do about it. Or if freedom fighters in South Africa refused to fight for their freedoms, we would be experiencing a very different perception of history right now. The fact is, history is peppered with small groups of people or individuals who have made a massive difference. Now, I've kind of honed in on this point a little bit. I've kind of sort of repeated myself a little bit there, and that's very, very deliberate because some of the stuff that I cover, some of the research that I put out there is very heavy, and it can be a bit depressing sometimes when you see a lot of this stuff and it is overwhelming. So I think the key to it really is making sure that we know that there is a lot of power in what we do. So I then aim to inspire people who are still persuaded by the establishment view of the world, because a lot of what I want to do is inspire people to take action, because a lot of what we read kind of gives us the fear or freeze mentality. You either fear something, or if you don't fear it, then you kind of freeze and do nothing. And that's something I see a lot throughout a lot of things that I read, actually. And then you've got groups of people who believe that you should just kind of ignore everything and meditate on love and peace instead. I think love and peace are great, and I think they're fantastic things to meditate on, but I don't necessarily think that comes in place of awareness. I don't see them as two opposite ends of the spectrum necessarily. So what tactics are being used against us then, and how do we kind of resist some of the things that are thrown at us?